All right. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Wanda Watts from Alberta Environment and Parks. She'll be speaking today about Alberta Wetland Policy, restoration outcomes. Wanda, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ian. How's my audio there? I just want to do a quick audio check to make sure it's all good.
I hear you well, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, my name is Wanda Watts. I work as an environmental protection officer, wetland specialist within the Regulatory Assurance Division of Alberta Environment and Parks. I'm one of 5 EPO wetland specialists in Alberta, and we kind of share a dual role. We work directly within the compliance program, but we also support wetland policy implementation, which typically has involved working on development of tools, directives, and some of the programs like the Wetland Replacement Program. And before I get started, I just want to say we really appreciate the opportunity to give this information. So thank you so much for your time and for joining, and let's get started. So today I'll cover a few topics connected to the restoration outcomes of the wetland replacement or the Alberta Wetland Policy. I'll give a brief policy refresher. I'll cover the process and overview of the wetland replacement program itself. The bulk of the presentation slides are related to the restoration outcomes of actual wetland replacement projects. After that, I'll discuss one compliance file that has a restoration outcome. For those of you that aren't aware of some of the work that we do within compliance, the compliance program. And then there'll also be a slide at the end about some regulatory updates and what's coming in 2021 and beyond, and a brief summary, and then some time for questions at the end. So since I'm not sure exactly what background people have, we'll do a quick refresher of the Alberta Wetland Policy. And so on this slide here, I'll just read it in case folks have difficulty with visual aspects of the slide. Hopefully it's all coming across okay on your computer. The overarching goal of the wetland policy is to conserve, restore, protect, and manage Alberta's wetlands to sustain the benefits they provide to the environment, society, and the economy. And these are outlined further in 4 outcomes, which are wetlands of the highest value are protected for the long-term benefit of all Albertans. Wetlands and their benefits are conserved and restored in areas where losses have been high. Wetlands are managed by avoiding and minimizing negative impacts, and where necessary, replacing lost wetland value. And wetlands are managed in a regional context. So I'm sure most of you have seen some of this, the mitigation hierarchy previously, which typically discusses the preferred mitigation preference, which is avoidance followed by minimization. But the focus of the presentation today is on the replace portion of the mitigation hierarchy. So currently applicants can fulfill the replacement obligations by either paying a wetland replacement fee to the government or undertaking permitted responsible wetland replacement. And sorry, I have I have my instant messenger popping up, so I'm not sure how to keep that from happening. Sorry, I apologize. And at this time, the policy does also mention an option to purchase wetland credits from a wetland bank. That hasn't been developed yet. A brief overview of wetland functions. So it is known that wetlands provide numerous important ecosystem services in the form of ecological functions, and that there's many benefits to society that come from those functions. So specific ecological functions such as water storage, water filtration, groundwater recharge, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, they all provide numerous benefits to society, as well as providing important habitat features for plants and animals. So these wetland functions provide benefits that benefit Albertans in the form of flood protection and mitigation, water quality improvement for safe drinking water, and for healthy and productive aquatic ecosystems. And like I mentioned, habitats for a variety of species, including sensitive or rare species and plants, as well as numerous opportunities for recreation and aesthetic appreciation as well. So the wetland policy combines wetland functions into 5 wetland value functional groups, and they're shown here on the left. So there's biodiversity, water quality improvement, flood reduction, and human value. And these are used with abundance to consider the historical loss of wetlands in that area. These wetland functional groups are used to develop the models embedded in the Alberta Wetland Rapid Evaluation Tool, which is called ABRET. And ABRET it's a tool that standardizes the data collected for a wetland to describe a variety of wetland functions. ABRET provides a result in one of 4 categories shown here, A, B, C, or D, with A value being the highest and D value being the lowest relative to other wetlands. ABRET uses about 150 indicators for both the field and the desktop versions. So wetland class is one indicator, but other indicators that are used, but this is obviously not an exhaustive list, is the amount of woody cover, interspersion of woody and herbaceous cover, amount of open water, permanence of flooding versus saturation, connectivity to other water bodies and other habitat types, and the likelihood of human or animal use. There are 2 ABRET variations used in Alberta. One was designed for the parkland and prairie natural regions, and one for the boreal and foothills natural regions. So this slide shows the wetland replacement matrix that determines the ratio of wetland value that is lost versus what is replaced. The column highlighted in light blue here shows the ratios expected as replacement fees for lost or impacted wetlands. For example, a lost C value wetland is replaced at a ratio of 2 to 1 with a D value replacement wetland and a ratio of 8 to 1 for a lost A value wetland. Wetland replacement fees consider the abundance and density of wetlands along with historical loss in a region, and these are referred to as the relative wetland value assessment units. So the map on the right shows that there are 21 of these units spread across the province. And then the table on the left shows the amount of dollars per hectare that would be collected for wetland replacement fees. The landscape units that are relative wetland value unit assessments are determined by hydrological and ecological similarity, and they're assessed relative to other wetlands within the unit. So the range for wetland replacement fees starts as low as $10,300 in areas of the public lands in the green area and ranges to $19,400 on other lands. But in total, the average replacement fee for a lost wetland in Alberta is roughly $18,000 per hectare. So this slide here shows the tracking of wetland loss as well as wetland replacement fees that have been paid. So data collected from the implementation of the policy in 2015 to the end of 2020 showed that permanent impacts to 992 hectares of wetlands and a total replacement area owed of 2,261 hectares. The average replacement ratio of wetland replacement is at a 2 to 1 ratio, and that the total replacement fees collected since policy implementation is $35.8 million. So I know that was a very brief overview of the policy. So now that I've covered it, we'll move on to the wetland replacement program. The wetland replacement program was in development for a number of years and became a priority task in the last half of 2019. The wetland replacement program has a mission statement, and it's described here. It's to reestablish wetlands and partnerships with Albertans by providing resources for collaborative replacement projects across the province. So this is a busy slide showing a couple of maps, and I know you probably can't see them very clearly here, but I wanted to show them just so you could see the difference between the two. So this shows the priority area maps that were developed for the wetland replacement program. They were developed to align with policy outcomes, number 2 and 3, which focus on restoration in areas where losses have been high and replacing lost wetland values where necessary. So the priority area maps are based on watersheds, and specifically they're based on Alberta's hydrological unit code watersheds, and at 2 different scales, the HUC 4 and the HUC 6 watersheds. The HUC-4 watersheds are mostly larger than 500 square kilometers, and HUC-6 watersheds are nested within the HUC-4 watersheds and mostly larger than 200 square kilometers. Also, as a note, the HUC watershed codes are subdivisions of the relative wetland value unit assessment units that I showed you on a slide a few minutes ago. So the priority areas are based on the mitigation hierarchy in the Alberta Wetland Mitigation Directive and are prioritized as follows. Within the same local HUC-6 or HUC-4 watershed, within the same municipality, and in the same relative wetland value assessment units that have experienced high historical wetland loss. The HUC-4 priority area map on the left and the HUC-6 priority area map on the right, it uses 3 priority rankings for both of them. So high, medium, and low. Areas with a high priority are shown in red, which kind of shows up here as pink. And then the medium priority is shown in green, and low priority is shown in blue. And I know they're not great graphics, and I apologize for that. There's also areas that are undesignated, and those are left as white. So the priority rankings have been given to watersheds based on the amount of historical wetland loss. And just because there isn't a designation for priority doesn't mean that wetland replacement projects cannot occur in these areas, just that they've been prioritized to one of the high, medium, or low areas instead. So this is just a close-up view of one of the maps that I showed previously, just so you can see how they're delineated in terms of wetlands. And also it has the overlay of the municipality boundaries as well. So the choice to use watershed boundaries to determine the priority areas for wetland replacement, as opposed to just municipal, is that we wanted to make sure that the ecological functions of the wetlands that were lost had a direct association to the drainage basins and watersheds which had been impacted by the wetland loss. Since it was also anticipated that wetland replacement projects might not operate over the same geographic boundaries, for example, a project undertaken by a watershed council or by Ducks Unlimited Canada, watershed scale was the preferred choice. So in the policy overview section a bit earlier, I referred to 5 wetland value categories that are used to determine the relative value of individual wetlands within the ABRET tool. These same value categories of biodiversity and ecological health, water quality improvement, hydrologic function, human uses, as well as relative abundance are also embedded into the wetland replacement program. The proposal submission requirements given to program participants for wetland replacement outline these same value groups, and participants are asked to provide information on wetland functions before and after the project, not just based on area. Additionally, these wetland value groups are considered and evaluated when reviewing a potential project through AEP's review committee, which is made out of wetland specialists. So in addition to priority area designations, various definitions were refined for use in the wetland replacement program. And I'm going to share the distinction between restoration and construction in the next 2 slides. Also, this seems like a good time to address the distinction between the word restoration that's used in the policy and the word replacement that's used in the wetland replacement program. The word replacement was chosen because it encompasses both wetland restoration and construction, and it's not just focused on restoration. So wetland restoration for the wetland replacement program is defined as the manipulation of the physical, chemical, or biological characteristics of a site with the goal of returning to natural or historical area and functions to a former degraded wetland. Wetland restoration projects may involve one or both of the following additional terms: reestablishment or rehabilitation. And reestablishment is focused on the natural or historical hydrology and it's in the resulting wetland area of a drained or partially drained wetland. And that can be done by blocking drainage ditches, rendering tile drainage systems ineffective, or removing berms or infill. This results in a gain in wetland area and typically function. Rehabilitation addresses a degraded or impaired wetland by recontouring the topography and repairing soils and vegetation. Rehabilitation results in a gain in wetland function, but not typically area. Wetland construction is defined as the manipulation of the physical, chemical, or biological characteristics of a site for the purpose of creating a wetland at a location that was historically upland or a non-wetland area. There are many examples of this type of project, and it can include construction of a new wetland on area on an upland site, like I mentioned, retrofitting portions of an existing stormwater facility to create new functioning wetland area, recontouring a dugout or other excavated non-wetland feature to create new functioning wetlands area, or recontouring upland areas adjoining wetlands to expand existing wetland areas. So it's not shown here, but one additional term that was defined through our process is wetland enhancement, and that's typically focused on improving a specific wetland function beyond its natural historical level, but it typically leads to a decline in other wetland functions and does not result in a gain of wetland area. For example, the installation of bird boxes within or adjacent to a wetland, construction of a boardwalk within a wetland, fencing or off-site watering. These options are not currently eligible under the Wetland Replacement Program. And while we recognize that they have potential ecological and human benefits, they don't replace lost wetland area or function. So I'll just outline a little bit about the basic process of the Wetland Replacement Program for participants and kind of an insider look of what happens when folks submit projects for proposals. So once a program participant has shown interest and has signed a memorandum of understanding, they submit proposals for review and approval. And we generally encourage program participants to contact us early and discuss any projects they may have in mind, so they can discuss site selection and identification process. And that's just to make sure that it meets program definitions and the program eligibility criteria. And then following submission, we have an internal review committee of wetland specialists that evaluate the proposal. And after that, they develop a contract. The contract has a unique name, it's a service agreement, and it outlines not only the project itself and how the project will be undertaken, but it also agrees on things like payment milestones and the project deliverables. Also, if the project is on private land, a landowner agreement has to be negotiated to allow access by not only the municipality or the program participant, but also Alberta Environment and Parks for the duration of the project. And that's just to ensure that we can check on inspection and just see how things are progressing over time. So landowner agreements can include lease payments to the landowner, so they can be paid for the wetland on their property. And then the landowner agreements also have to indicate that the landowner acknowledges that the wetland will now be protected under provisions in the Water Act in Alberta. So typical project deliverables that are to be completed include the site selection process, project design and planning, addressing any ownership and land use issues, entering into negotiated landowner agreements, and obtaining written consent of any third parties that are required. Additionally, it includes things like anything that's required for regulatory authorization, the construction phase, and other services related to the completion of the wetland replacement, the inspection of the project after it's constructed, and to confirm that the wetland replacement works were executed according to the design plan. The funding can also include things like vegetation planting as required, and also adaptive management needs and periodic inspection and routine maintenance. So in year one of the program in 2020, 11 memorandum of understanding were signed with ducts and 10 municipalities. 7 contracts were executed for projects, and we spent $3.7 million, and that was invested in wetland replacement projects. So now that I've covered the basics of the wetland replacement program, I'd like to show you some of the projects that were constructed last year. And in fact, I have slides for all 7 of them, although I will, a spoiler alert, I don't have any post-construction photos yet. So hopefully the next time there's a presentation, we'll have some photos of the projects once there's been a growing season. Okay, so the first project I'll discuss today is the Anderson project. It's located north of the city of Grand Prairie and was completed by the county of Grand Prairie. The primary focus of this project was to restore wetland area and functions that were lost through agricultural development in the watershed. The project was focused on restoring hydrology and vegetation, and the primary focus for this particular landowner was to reduce surface flow velocity and decrease erosion. So the total outcomes of the project were focused on the benefits of having flow attenuation, reduction of phosphorus and nitrogen in the runoff, habitat improvements for wildlife, including various waterfowl, wading birds, shorebirds, amphibians, and moose, as well as an increase in pollinator habitat and overall biodiversity. So the project design for this project was the restoration of 9 smaller temporary and seasonal marsh wetlands that in total covered 2 hectares of area. As a note, the eastern part of the project area is within a provincial trumpeter swan buffer area, and it's also near Saskatoon Island Provincial Park. In the previous slide, there you could see Saskatoon Lake, and it's frequented by swans, ducks, geese, and various wading birds. The project here is located in the Boreal Natural Region, and there's a list of federally and provincially listed species that I thought I'd share just so that you have some context on the region. It includes bald eagle, black tern, great blue heron, great gray owl, sharp-tailed grouse, grizzly bear, trumpeter swans, short-eared owl, western grebes, and western wood pewee. The project here is also currently part of the Alberta Conservation Association's Landowner Habitat Program. So I do have a couple of photos of the construction, and this just shows one of the actual 9 wetlands. And the photos here show the 3-meter wide spillway that was being constructed for this one wetland. It wasn't visible on the slide showing the 9, but it's called Wetland E, which doesn't probably mean anything at this point, but it's just showing some of the construction phases for the program. So like I said, hopefully in future variations of this presentation, we'll have some post-construction photos showing all 9 wetlands. So the second project I'll describe today is the Hope and Rigby project. And if you can see here, it's just on the south side of Saskatoon Lake. It's not far from the Anderson project, which was just to the west of Saskatoon Lake in this picture. And it was also completed by the county of Grand Prairie. It's a different landowner than the other one, which is 2 different landowners, Hope and Rigby. And the project here was focused on restoring the wetland hydrology that was lost due to wetland drainage, restoring the wetland vegetation, and improving water quality, biodiversity, and habitat. So similar to the Anderson project to the north, the project objectives included flow attenuation, reduction of phosphorus and nitrogen in the runoff, habitat improvement for wildlife, various waterfowl, wading birds and shorebirds, amphibians and moose. And the project design was to restore marsh and shallow open water wetland of approximately ½ a hectare. This project is also located within the Boreal Natural Region, and similar to the Anderson project, the area hosts similar federally and provincially listed species. Also, an interesting part about this project is that there's a parking lot adjacent to it that's associated with the Saskatoon Island Provincial Park, and landowners would have the landowners would encourage public access to the area to support educational and wildlife viewing opportunities. So I know the photos.
Just so you know, you're cutting in and out on us fairly regularly.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. It's part of the VPN, I think. I'm not sure how to fix it.
That's okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that, Ian. Can you hear me okay right now?
Yep.
Okay. I'll just hope that the connection stays. Okay, so these photos, I know they're a bit blurry, but they show some of the construction on the Hope and Rigby project. So the photo on the left shows some of the excavation that was completed to excavate a deep pool near the east end of the restoration area. And the photo on the right shows the shoreline area shaped to create shallow bays and peninsulas, as well as the addition of some coarse woody debris debris for structure and diversity. So the third project that I'll show today is the Victor Lake project, and it's located just outside the hamlet of Grand Cache and was undertaken by the Municipal District of Greenview. The primary focus of this particular project was not restoration, it was focused on construction, and it was to focus on intercepting the surface flows that come from the catchment and into Victor Lake. It's a really steep hillside in this area between Grand Cache and Victor Lake. And so Victor Lake is it's a drinking water supply for not only the hamlet, but the surrounding Indigenous communities. And so the focus was to create an area where the water could store and collect and protect the drinking water quality of Victor Lake. And the reason why this was classified as wetland construction is that it couldn't be reasonably proven that there was a wetland there previously. And so it was done as a wetland construction project. So in this picture here, you can see that there's a yellow outline showing the location of the wetland. And the project design included establishment of wetland hydrology and wetland vegetation to mitigate the risk of contaminated or polluted surface water runoff. The project is intended to improve water quality of Victor Lake generally, and it's also to increase habitat for migratory birds and pollinators, as well as increase overall biodiversity. The project included wetland construction of a marsh wetland with some shallow open water areas that had variable depths. The project's located in the Rocky Mountain Natural Region, and the area is within a grizzly bear core zone, and there's a number of federally and provincially listed species here, including barred owl, bull trout, boreal toad, northern pygmy owl, and Arctic grayling. So here the photo on the left shows the excavation of the wetland and the creation of some irregular shorelines and surfaces that were used to establish various hydrologic zones to support vegetation and optimize water quality improvement functions. The photo on the right shows woody debris placement to improve habitat structure, as well as to deter motorized vehicle traffic in this newly created wetland. The fourth project I'll be discussing today is the Telford Lake project. It's located within the city of Leduc, just south of Edmonton. And the primary focus of this project was to restore wetland area and function to improve water quality, increase habitat and biodiversity, as well as offer opportunities for human use given its location and its accessibility. Project objectives included the establishment of wetland hydrology and wetland vegetation to reduce peak surface water flows and offer flood attenuation, increase water quality and biodiversity with the overall goal of increasing various habitat types that are uncommon and have been lost due to urban and agricultural development, as well as offer habitat for sensitive and species at risk. So pre-construction of this site consisted of, oh wait, I'm on the wrong slide here. So this particular project included construction of a wetland that was just shy of half a hectare. And you can see the irregular shape, and also on the bottom, you can see the connection to Telford Lake there as well. And in between the two, there's actually a walking path through those the white lines in between the designed wetland and Telford Lake. And I know the photos aren't very interesting. They were constructed just last fall. So the photo on the left shows the deep and shallow pools being excavated, as well as the shoreline. And then the photo on the right shows the placement of some large woody debris and straw. And the straw was spread around the edges to control some of the weeds and have reduced the weed ingress from adjacent areas until the wetland vegetation could develop in the following growing season. So the fifth project that I'm showing you today is the Silver Sage project, and it's located in the far southeastern corner of Alberta, southeast of Medicine Hat, and it was undertaken by Ducks Unlimited Canada. The project objectives here included reestablishment of wetland hydrology and wetland vegetation to reduce peak surface water flows, offer flood attenuation, increase water quality and biodiversity with the overall goal of increasing habitat types. So the pre-construction condition of the area includes a partially drained wetland in an area that's been used for agricultural purposes for cereal crops and cattle grazing. The primary focus of this project is to increase wetland from the existing 10.5 hectares to just under 30 hectares for a total increase of 18.85 hectares. The land is owned by the Alberta Conservation Association. And previously, just as a note, they've undertaken 430 hectares of native prairie grassland on this property. Restoration of prairie grassland. Some of the federally and provincially listed species in this area include alder flycatcher, American white pelican, Baltimore oriole, black-throated green warbler, common yellowthroat, eastern kingbird, great blue heron, least flycatcher, short-eared owl, and western grebe. So the photo here on the left shows the excavation of the area for the key trench that was going to be used to increase the water level in this wetland. And then the photo on the right shows some of the riprap being placed on the rock chute to reduce any potential erosion in case of excess flows or peak flows. And the sixth project that was undertaken in 2020 is the Brown and Skulski project. It's located just northeast of Nanton, and it was undertaken also by Ducks Unlimited Canada. The project objectives included the reestablishment of wetland hydrology and wetland vegetation, and the focus was changing it from a seasonal wetland and to one that is semi-permanent, so that water permanence is there for more weeks of the year. It was also to increase biodiversity with the overall goal of increasing habitat types that are uncommon and have been lost due to agricultural development. And similar to the previous project, this project involved building a key trench and dam to hold water back to increase the overall size of the wetland. And then the photos here on this slide show the rock dam and chute that were completed for this project as well. And the seventh of the projects, which is last but not least, is the Lock End project. And this one was located about 20 kilometers northwest of Calgary. It's located in Rocky View County, and it was also undertaken by Ducks Unlimited. The area was initially impacted by agricultural developments in the early 1950s and 60s, and most of this wetland was drained. So the project goals for here are to reestablish the natural historical hydrology and associated wetland functions of the wetland basin. And these photos here show some of the wetland outline. You can see on the right some of the delineated area that would be restored through the project. And so the same as the previous project, this one is to change it, the class of wetland, to a class 4 semi-permanent wetland. And the size is approximately 112 hectares. So this project included the installation of a low maintenance engineered water control structure. And unfortunately, I don't have any photos to show of the construction of this one. But like I said, hopefully future variations of this presentation will include some nice photos to show the work that's been done. So on this slide, you can see from the map, the 7 projects that I discussed, they're marked by the red stars. They're spread out across the province, and they stretch all the way from northwestern Alberta to southeastern Alberta. And of the 7 wetland replacement projects, 3 were completed by municipalities. Alfred Lake by Edmonton and Leduc was completed by a city, and the other 3 were completed by communities. So in total, we had 6 that were restoration projects, 1 that was construction, and a total of approximately 158 hectares replaced in 2020. So I'd just like to take a few minutes to showcase one of the files that I was involved in for the compliance program. And for those of you not familiar, the compliance program handles responses to unauthorized activities and environmental complaints. And in cases where it's warranted, asks or demands for remedial or restorative actions. And in this case, such as restoring wetlands that have been impacted by unauthorized activities. So the photos on the left here on both leftmost photos, they show impacts that have occurred within plants, and then the photos on the right are compliance actions, and the photos show it after the compliance actions were taken to remediate the area. So the file I'd like to share with you today involves wetland infilling. It's located in northwestern Alberta. It's a location on private land adjacent to a river. And it's actually, it was an eastern portion of a seasonal shrubby swamp wetland. It had been filled in because there was a connection to Bear River for surface water flow. It altered the location of the flow, and it also altered the natural drainage of the wetland to and from the river. Additionally, wetland and riparian vegetation had been removed and mowed. Excavation and placement of additional fill material had location that altered the flow of the water across the area. And then the photo on the right shows the same area from an aerial photo from 1952. And as you can see in the photo, even in 1952, there was actual agricultural development in the area. And in the end, this impact totaled just under 2 hectares of wetland. So this slide shows a photo of the wetland area after it had been infilled, graded, and seeded with grass. And compliance staff, through the use of an enforcement order, ordered the landowner to hire an authenticating professional with expertise in wetland restoration to complete an impact assessment and prepare a report outlining the restoration plan. So on this slide, you can see some of the restoration plan design. And the goals were to replace the wetland area and functions that were lost due to the infilling, water storage functions to attenuate flows, as well as providing sediment and toxicant retention. They also want to return stabilization functions to improve water quality and provide wildlife habitat. The slide here shows the engineering drawings submitted as part of the report and included restoring the hydrology and vegetation wetland conditions. Restoration of the site was achieved by reestablishing the original pre-disturbance contours, restoring surface water connections to the river, and planting of native woody vegetation within the floodplain. Vegetation was restored through seeding and live staking of willows, red osier dogwood, and balsam poplar. Additionally, coarse woody debris was added to provide structure and microsites to encourage establishment of native woody riparian species. And the soil was given a rough and loose treatment technique to prevent compaction and weed growth. The photos on this slide show on the left an aerial view of the wetland after it was restored, but it was prior to the growing season. So it's still bare earth, but you can see the pools and areas filled with water in the photo. And then the photo in the middle is aquatic vegetation that was growing once there was a growing season. And on the right-hand side, the wetland was storing some open water. So we're nearing the end of the presentation, and I just wanted to give a slide or two about regulatory updates and some initiatives that are happening now. So AEP, Alberta Environment and Parks, eliminated the approval requirements for proponents that were undertaking low-risk restoration or construction projects. And there was a new code of practice that was developed for wetland replacement projects, and it was released just recently in December of 2020. So projects under the Wetland Replacement Program have to adhere to either the code of practice or they require a Water Act approval. The code of practice supports participants in the program. It also accelerates the addition of wetlands on the landscape and stimulates Alberta's economy by creating the right regulatory and economic conditions for environmental projects that gain ecosystems, goods, and services. In addition to the code of practice for wetland replacement works, AEP streamlined the regulatory process for road maintenance activities and eliminated requirements for field assessments and full wetland assessment reports. Those were replaced with requirements for desktop assessments and completion of a form instead. The shortened report will reduce AEP review times as well. Future development to modernize the regulatory system will also further reduce approval wait times. In terms of wetland policy implementation, there's a review underway to identify where red tape can be reduced, how to improve implementation to meet environmental and wetland policy outcomes, and undertake continuous improvement in operational policy and tools, as well as establish performance measures and monitoring and reporting plans. So in summary today, I've shared some information here on some of the ways to find out more information about the wetland policy, or if you have questions about the wetland replacement program, there's specific email addresses shown on the screen. I've also included the contact information from Matt Wilson. He's the team lead for the wetlands program in Alberta, and otherwise you can also contact myself. And that concludes the presentation for today. And I want to thank all of you for joining and tolerating not only the length of the presentation, hopefully it wasn't long, but also the audio difficulties that I had as well. So thank you. And then I'll turn it back over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Wanda, for the very interesting presentation on the Alberta Wetland Policy. If anybody who has questions, please feel free to type them in, either type them into the chat box or raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and all right, here we go. The first question is, I'm having trouble finding those maps of the wetland replacement program online. Where can we find the information about the program, as well as application requirements, forms, etc.?
So I can, oh, there's an echo. What's the best way to share information in this forum, Ian?
You could actually either type the web address into the into the conversation box. You see the little bubble?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the information, most of it's provided on the website on the link I showed you. But I can also share the actual maps if folks want to reach out to the AEP.wetland email address or AEP wetland replacement. If you have questions about those, we can share that information directly with those participants that want that information.
Okay. Yeah. So if you have the question, if you want more direct information on that, please contact John, and he'll forward your questions to Wanda, and she'll get back to you with any specific questions you have about that. All
yeah,
right.
I've just put my email address in there because I realized that it's my audio is terrible, and I can't disconnect the VPN without disconnecting from the internet. So
okay.
I apologize.
Okay. What was the cost of the compliance restoration, or was it charged to the farmer?
So it wasn't a farmer in that case. It was a landowner that owned a campground, and the landowner was responsible for the cost of the wetland remedial plan, and is also the implementation of that. I don't have the exact number. I could look into that, Paul, if you want that information.
All right. And then how much of the 35.8 million in payments mentioned at the start of the presentation have been paid by the agriculture sector?
I can probably find that out. I don't track that information. It's tracked through the Grants and Program Services group, but I can get a number for that if you want it. And you can just email me. Is it Ron? Ron, you can email me if you want. Sorry, I don't have some of that data. I apologize.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions right away, but again, if you do have questions in the future, you could contact Wanda or John, and John can forward any questions you have to Wanda, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to answer any questions you have. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Wanda for her informative presentation today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to wish everybody a happy and healthy 2021. And we look forward to seeing everybody in our next webinar, which will be next month. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.